It was another quiet evening in the small town of Green Ridge. The streets were calm, the sky was turning orange, and most people were heading home after a long day. Inside a little restaurant on the corner of Main Street, a man named Michael stood behind the counter, staring at the empty tables. The smell of freshly cooked food hung in the air, but there was no one to eat it. The sign outside said Santos Family Diner, and though the lights were warm and welcoming, almost no one came through the door these days. Michael had opened this place 10 years ago with big dreams. It had once been full of laughter, clinking plates, and the comforting buzz of people talking over meals. Families came every weekend, kids ran around, and locals said it was their favorite spot in town. But things had changed. A large fast food chain had opened just down the street a few months back, offering cheaper meals and flashy deals. Bit by bit, Michael watched his customers drift away. He stood at the window, his hands resting on the counter, and looked outside at the glowing sign of the new burger place. It was crowded, as always. The cars in their parking lot made his own empty lot look even sadder. He sighed and walked back to the kitchen, where his old friend and cook Danny was wiping down the stove. "Any customers?" Danny asked, though he already knew the answer. Michael shook his head slowly. "Not one since lunchtime." Danny gave him a sympathetic look. "It's just a slow week. Things will turn around." Michael smiled weakly. "That's what we said last week, and the week before." He walked over to the table near the back where the day's receipts sat in a small pile. He picked them up and flipped through the papers, hardly enough to cover the bills, let alone pay the staff. Rent was due in a few days, and the gas company had already sent a warning letter. He tried not to let the stress show, but the worry lines on his face told the truth. He sat down, leaned back in the chair, and stared at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above. For a moment he thought about his father, who had started the diner decades ago. His father used to say, "Feed people with love and they'll always come back." It had been true for a long time. People didn't just come to eat, they came because Michael made them feel at home. But now, in this new world of delivery apps and fast discounts, kindness alone didn't seem to be enough. The bell above the door jingled suddenly, breaking the silence. Michael quickly straightened up, hoping it was a customer. But it was just his delivery man bringing in some vegetables and bread. "Evening, Mike," the man greeted, setting down the crates. "Evening," Michael replied, forcing a smile. He signed the receipt and tried not to show his disappointment. When the delivery man left, Michael looked around the empty dining room again. The chairs were neatly arranged, the tables spotless, the lights giving off a soft golden glow. Everything looked perfect, except for the missing sound of people. The silence felt heavier than usual tonight. Danny came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. "You should eat something," he said. "You've been up since dawn." Michael nodded but didn't move. His stomach wasn't hungry. It was heavy with worry. He picked up a pen and started writing a list. Bills to pay, things to fix, ingredients to buy. But halfway through, he stopped and rubbed his forehead. What was the point of buying more ingredients if there were no customers? He thought about closing early, maybe just calling it a night. But something in him refused to give up. He had opened these doors every single day for years, rain or shine, and he wasn't going to let one slow night break that tradition. So he turned on the small radio behind the counter. A soft tune played, filling the empty space. He adjusted the salt shakers on each table, checked the napkin holders, and wiped the counter again. Tasks he'd already done. But it gave his hands something to do. Outside, the rain started to fall, soft at first, then heavier. The streetlights reflected on the wet pavement, and the few cars that passed left trails of water behind them. Through the window, Michael could see people hurrying by with umbrellas. Most didn't even glance at his diner. The clock on the wall showed 7:45, usually. By this time, there would have been at least a few regulars. Old Mr. Jenkins with his cup of coffee, the Miller family with their 2 little girls, and sometimes a couple of high school kids grabbing burgers after practice. But not tonight. Not for weeks, actually. Danny came out again, holding a tray. "I made some stew," he said. "Might as well eat before it gets cold." Michael nodded and took a seat by the window. The stew smelled good, rich and warm, but it tasted bittersweet. Every bite reminded him of the days when people used to say this was the best stew in town. After a few minutes, Danny sat across from him. "You know, Mike," he said gently, "maybe we should start doing something different. Like offer discounts or post online. Everyone's doing that now. Michael stirred his spoon slowly. Yeah, I thought about it. But we don't really have the budget for ads. And even if we did, I'm not sure it would help. People just go where it's cheaper. Danny sighed. Maybe, but you've got Heart, man. That's worth something. Michael smiled faintly. Heart doesn't pay rent. The two men sat quietly for a while, listening to the rain tapping against the windows. Then Danny stood up. I'll go finish cleaning the kitchen. You should head home soon. I will, Michael said, though he didn't mean it. He wanted to stay just a little longer, hoping maybe someone would come in before closing time. After Danny left for the back, Michael walked over to the front door and looked outside again. The rain had turned into a downpour now. A few people hurried past, heads down, coats pulled tight. The glow from the streetlights made the water shimmer like glass. As he watched, he noticed a small figure standing under the awning across the street. A woman, holding the hand of a little boy. They didn't have umbrellas, just a thin coat between them. The boy looked like he was shivering. The woman bent down to say something, and the boy shook his head. Then she took his hand again, and they stepped into the rain. Michael followed them with his eyes as they crossed the street slowly, puddles splashing under their shoes. For a moment he thought they were just passing by, but then the woman hesitated. She looked up at the restaurant sign and seemed to consider something. After a few seconds, she gently pushed open the door. The bell jingled softly, and Michael turned toward the sound. The woman looked nervous, her hair damp from the rain. The little boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, clung to her coat. His cheeks were red and his eyes darted around the warm, empty diner. Hi, the woman said softly. Are you still open? Michael nodded. Of course. Come in, get out of the rain. She smiled faintly and led her son to a table near the window. Michael handed them menus, though he noticed the way she hesitated before taking them. There was a quiet pause as she looked down at the options. Michael could tell something was off. The way she bit her lip, the way the boy kept glancing at her, as if asking silently if it was okay to order. Finally, she looked up and said, could we just get one small bowl of soup? That's all, please. Her voice was polite, but there was a hint of embarrassment in it. Michael's heart sank a little. He looked at the boy, thin, tired, and clearly hungry. He didn't have to ask to know what was going on. Of course, he said gently. Why don't you two sit tight? I'll bring it right over. He went back to the kitchen where Danny was wiping the counter. 2 customers, Michael said quietly. Danny raised his eyebrows. Really? Finally some luck. Michael nodded. A mother and her kid. They just want a small bowl of soup. Danny frowned. That's all? Yeah, Michael said. But make them something more. Maybe the stew and some bread. I'll take care of it. Danny didn't argue. He just nodded and started working quickly. Within minutes, the smell of warm soup and fresh bread filled the air. Michael arranged the plates on a tray and carried them out to the table. Here you go, he said with a smile. I added a little extra. It's on the house tonight. The woman looked surprised. Oh no, I can't. It's fine, Michael interrupted gently. It's cold out there. You both look like you could use a warm meal. Her eyes softened and she whispered, Thank you. That's very kind. The little boy smiled shyly, his eyes lighting up as he looked at the food. Thank you, mister, he said quietly. Michael nodded and went back to the counter, pretending to tidy things up. But he kept glancing at them. The way the boy eagerly ate his soup, the way the mother watched him with love and relief. Something about the scene warmed Michael's heart. It reminded him of why he had opened this place in the first place, not for money, not for success, but to serve people, to give them comfort when they needed it most. He didn't know it yet, but that small moment, that one act of kindness on a rainy night, was about to change everything. The rain outside kept falling, soft but steady, tapping lightly against the glass windows of the little diner. Inside, the warm light from the ceiling lamps made the air feel safe and cozy. The mother and her young son sat by the window, steam rising from their bowls of soup. Every few seconds, the boy blew on his spoon before taking a careful sip, his small hands wrapped tightly around the warm bowl. The mother watched him quietly, her tired eyes softening for the first time that day. Michael stood behind the counter, pretending to wipe down some cups, but really, he was watching them. There was something about the two that stirred something deep in him. Maybe it was the way the boy smiled after every spoonful, or how the mother kept trying to hide her worry behind a gentle smile. She looked like someone who had been through a lot but was still holding herself together for her child. After a few minutes, the mother looked up and met his eyes. She gave him a small, grateful nod. He smiled back and turned toward the kitchen, where Danny was leaning on the counter with a towel over his shoulder. "They seem nice," Danny said quietly. "That boy's eating like he hasn't had a proper meal in days." Michael nodded, his voice low. "Yeah, reminds me of when I was a kid. My dad used to feed anyone who came through that door hungry, even if they couldn't pay." Danny smirked softly. "Guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." Michael gave a faint smile. "Maybe." He poured 2 glasses of water and brought them over to the table. The boy looked up as he approached, his eyes bright. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice small but full of sincerity. "You're very welcome," Michael said, placing the glasses down. "How's the soup?" "It's really good," the boy replied, nodding quickly. "Better than the one my mom makes." The mother chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Don't listen to him. He just says that because he didn't have to wait for it." Michael laughed gently. "Well, I'll take the compliment anyway." He turned to head back, but the woman's voice stopped him. "Sir," she said quietly, "thank you for being so kind." "You didn't have to do that." Michael waved a hand. "It's nothing, really. A little food never hurt anyone." She hesitated for a moment, then said, "It means a lot more than you think." He smiled again, not sure what to say, and went back to the counter. As he stood there, wiping a glass that didn't need cleaning, he thought about what she said. He didn't know their story, but he could tell it wasn't an easy one. About 20 minutes later, the boy had finished every drop of soup and every crumb of bread. He leaned back in his chair looking satisfied, while his mother dabbed at her mouth with a napkin. For a few minutes, they just sat there in comfortable silence, listening to the rain. Then, as the boy started to yawn, the mother reached into her bag. Michael watched her pull out a small, folded wallet. She opened it carefully and looked inside. After a moment, she pulled out 2 crumpled bills and a few coins. She counted them twice, her hands trembling slightly. Michael walked over, shaking his head gently. "Don't worry about it," he said softly. "Dinner's on the house tonight." Her eyes widened. "Oh no, I can't let you do that. Please, at least take this." He smiled kindly and put his hand up. "Really, I mean it. You don't owe me anything." She hesitated, looking down at the money in her hands, then at her son, who was now half asleep against her arm. Finally, she put the wallet away. "You're very kind," she said softly. "Not many people would do that." Michael shrugged. "Maybe not. But my dad used to say that good food tastes better when it's shared. Guess I just never forgot that." The woman smiled for the first time, a real, genuine smile that lit up her tired face. "Your father sounds like a good man." "He was," Michael said quietly, glancing around the diner. This place was his dream. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain had eased into a gentle drizzle, and the street outside shimmered under the dim streetlights. The diner felt warm, almost peaceful. After a while, the woman reached across the table and gently brushed her son's hair back. "Come on, sweetheart," she whispered. "We should go. It's getting late." The boy stirred and blinked up at her sleepily. "Can we come back here again, Mom?" Michael's heart softened at that. The mother smiled, though her eyes looked sad. "We'll see," she said gently. "Maybe one day." Michael walked them to the door. "You two take care, all right? And if you're ever around again, you know where to find me." The woman nodded. "Thank you again. For everything." As they stepped out into the cool night, Michael noticed that she had no umbrella. Without thinking, he reached under the counter, grabbed the spare one he kept there, and hurried after them. "Hey," he called out. They turned around, surprised. He held out the umbrella. "Take this. You'll need it more than I do." The woman tried to refuse at first, but he insisted. Finally, she accepted it with a small smile. "Thank you," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're a good man." Michael smiled softly. "Just doing what anyone should." She gave him one last grateful look before walking away, the umbrella opening above her. The boy turned around and waved. "Bye, mister." Michael waved back, standing under the soft rain until they disappeared around the corner. When he walked back inside, the diner felt even emptier than before, but in a different way. Not sad, just quiet, peaceful. He looked at the empty bowls and the crumbs left on the table. Somehow it felt worth more than any money could have been. Danny came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands. They gone? Yeah, Michael said, still looking toward the door. Danny looked at the table and nodded approvingly. Good deed for the day, huh? Michael chuckled softly. Maybe. Could use a few paying customers, though, Danny added with a grin. Michael laughed, shaking his head. One step at a time, my friend. They cleaned up the table, washed the dishes, and finally turned off the open sign. As they locked up, Michael looked one more time out the window, wondering where the mother and son were heading. He hoped they had somewhere safe to go. That night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about them. He pictured the woman's tired eyes and the boy's bright smile. There was something about their faces that stayed with him, even as he drifted off to sleep. He didn't know why, but deep down he felt that he would see them again, that this wasn't the end of their story. The next few days went by slowly. The rain stopped, the sun came back out, and the streets of Greenridge returned to their usual rhythm. But the diner remained quiet. A few regulars dropped in here and there, but it still wasn't enough to cover the bills. Each morning, Michael opened the doors with hope, and each night he closed them with a little more worry. Still, he couldn't bring himself to regret helping the woman and her son. Every time he walked by the table where they'd sat, he found himself smiling a little. That night had reminded him of why he loved this place. It wasn't about money or competition. It was about connection, about people. A week later, as he was restocking the shelves behind the counter, Danny called out from the kitchen, "Hey, Mike, you might want to see this." Michael walked in, wiping his hands. "What's up?" Danny pointed at his phone. "Look at this. Somebody posted about you online." Michael frowned. "About me?" "Yeah," Danny said, scrolling. "Some woman wrote this long post about a kind diner owner who gave her and her kid a free meal on a rainy night. Said it restored her faith in people. It's getting a lot of shares." Michael blinked, surprised. "Really? That can't be." Danny turned the screen toward him. There it was. A photo of the rainy street outside the diner, taken that night. The post described everything in detail, how Michael had welcomed them, fed them without asking questions, and even given them his umbrella. The woman hadn't used his name, but the description made it clear who she was talking about. The comments were full of people praising the act. Some said they wanted to visit the diner to support it. Others shared their own stories of kindness. The post was spreading quickly. Danny grinned. "Looks like good karma's finally coming your way." Michael just stood there stunned. He didn't know what to say. He hadn't done it for attention. He hadn't expected anything. But reading her words, seeing how deeply it had touched her, it made something in his chest feel warm. "Maybe," he said finally, smiling faintly. "Maybe good things still happen when you do the right thing." Danny nodded. "You just wait. This might be the start of something." Michael chuckled softly. "I'll believe it when I see it." He didn't know it yet, but that small act of kindness, that simple meal given from the heart, was about to ripple farther than he ever imagined. What started as one quiet evening in an almost empty diner was about to become the turning point of his life. The next morning, Michael arrived at the diner earlier than usual. The sun had barely risen and the street outside was still quiet. The world felt calm, like it was holding its breath before the start of another busy day. He unlocked the front door, flipped the closed sign to open, and began setting up. He went through the same routine he had done thousands of times, checking the coffee machine, wiping the counter, turning on the lights, and straightening the chairs. But today felt a little different. He couldn't stop thinking about that online post Danny had shown him the night before. He still didn't know how it had spread so fast, or why so many people cared, but part of him felt something warm about it. Maybe, he thought, kindness really does travel further than we think. By 8 a.m., Danny arrived, still half asleep but smiling. "You're gonna want to see this," he said, waving his phone. Michael frowned, drying his hands on a towel. "What now?" Danny grinned and handed him the phone. "That post and the one the lady wrote, it's blowing up. People are sharing it everywhere. You've got folks online talking about this place like it's the nicest diner in town." Michael stared at the screen, scrolling through hundreds of comments. People from the same town, and even from nearby cities, had written things like, "We need more people like this. I'm taking my family to this diner next weekend." Kindness is still alive. He couldn't believe it. The story had taken on a life of its own, and for the first time in months, Michael felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Still, he tried not to get carried away. "We'll see if anyone actually shows up," he said, handing the phone back. But later that morning, the doorbell jingled. Then again, and again. Within an hour, 3 different families had come in. People he'd never seen before. One woman even mentioned she'd driven 30 minutes after reading the story online. "I saw what you did," she said warmly as she ordered breakfast. "That was really kind of you. Not everyone would do that." Michael smiled politely, still a bit embarrassed. "I just did what anyone should do," he said. But as more people came in, he realized this was something special. The diner, which had been nearly empty for months, was suddenly alive again. The smell of food filled the air, children's laughter echoed, and the quiet sound of forks and plates replaced the silence that used to hang heavy every night. Danny came out of the kitchen, wiping his brow. "You seeing this?" he said with a grin. "We've got a full house, Mike." "A full house?" Michael looked around amazed. I almost forgot what that looked like. By lunchtime, they were out of bread and nearly out of stew. Michael had to make an emergency call to his supplier to restock. It was chaotic, busy, and wonderful all at once. That night, after they finally closed, he sat at one of the tables, exhausted but smiling. Danny dropped into the chair across from him. "We just had the best day in months," he said, still catching his breath. "If it keeps going like this, we'll be back on our feet in no time." Michael nodded slowly. "Feels good, doesn't it?" "To see the place full again," Danny grinned. "Feels great. Maybe kindness really does pay off." Michael chuckled. "Maybe it does." Over the next few days, business only got better. More and more people came, some locals, some from out of town. A few even took pictures of their meals and posted them online, tagging the diner and writing things like, "The kindest place in town." For the first time in a long while, Michael was too busy to worry. He spent his days greeting customers, serving food, and telling stories about his father's old recipes. The laughter, the chatter, and the clinking of cups returned, just like the old days. One afternoon, as the lunch rush slowed down, a familiar voice caught his attention. "Excuse me," the voice said softly. Michael turned and froze. Standing by the door was the same woman from that rainy night, her son beside her. They looked different this time. The woman's clothes were clean and neat, her hair brushed, and there was a calmness in her eyes. The boy was holding a small brown bag and grinning from ear to ear. Michael's face broke into a smile. "Well, I'll be—" "Look who's back," the woman smiled shyly. "I hope it's okay we came by. I wanted to see you." "Of course it's okay," he said warmly. "You're always welcome here." They took a seat at the same table they'd used before. Michael brought them menus, though he already guessed they wouldn't need them. "I see business is doing well," the woman said, looking around at the full tables. Michael nodded. "You could say that. Things turned around pretty fast." She smiled knowingly. "I might have had something to do with that." Michael chuckled. "So that was you?" "The post," she nodded, a bit embarrassed. "I didn't expect it to go viral. I just wanted to say thank you for that night. You didn't know us, and you helped us anyway. I wrote that story hoping people would remember that kindness still exists." He looked at her quietly, his eyes soft. "You didn't owe me anything, you know." "I know," she said, her voice gentle. "But you gave me and my son more than food that night. You gave us hope." The boy, who had been quietly looking around, chimed in. "Mom got a new job," he said proudly. Michael smiled. "That's great news." "Yishi," the woman said with a small laugh. "Things are still a bit tight, but better than before. I wanted to come back and pay for that meal you gave us." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table. Michael frowned and shook his head. No. "I told you that meal was a gift." "I know," she said softly. "But please take it. Not as payment, as a thank you. You helped me when you didn't have to. Now I want to help you too." Michael looked down at the envelope. He hesitated for a moment, then accepted it with a quiet nod. "Thank you," he said simply. The boy smiled again. "Can I get the same soup as last time?" Michael laughed. "You bet you can." He brought them their meals, steaming soup, warm bread, and a slice of pie for dessert. As they ate, the boy talked nonstop about school, his friends, and how his mom made pancakes every Sunday now. The woman just smiled, listening, occasionally glancing at Michael with quiet gratitude. When they finished, she stood up and said, "I'm really glad things worked out for you." "You deserve it," Michael nodded. "And I'm glad things are getting better for you too. You're stronger than you think." She smiled and said softly, "Maybe, but sometimes strength comes from the kindness of strangers." With that, they left, leaving behind the same warmth they'd brought with them the first time. After they were gone, Michael opened the envelope. Inside was a small note that said, "You reminded me that good people still exist. Thank you for feeding us when we had nothing. I hope this helps your business grow." There was also a folded check inside, not a huge amount, but enough to cover part of his overdue bills. Michael stared at it for a moment, his eyes moist. He set it down and leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. Danny came out from the kitchen, drying his hands. "Everything all right?" Michael smiled faintly. "Better than all right." Danny looked at the envelope on the table. "That from her?" Michael nodded. "She came back. Wanted to thank me." Danny grinned. "See? Good things always find their way back." Michael looked around the diner. The full tables, the happy faces, the sound of laughter and clinking plates. It was alive again, not because of luck, but because of one small act of kindness that had come full circle. That night, after closing, he stood outside the diner and looked at the sign glowing softly in the dark. The same sign his father had hung there years ago. He thought about how close he'd come to losing it all, and how, somehow, helping someone else had saved him too. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "Guess you were right, Dad. Feed people with love and they'll always come back." He locked the door, smiled, and walked home through the quiet streets, feeling lighter than he had in months. He didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of it, because now he understood something simple and true. Sometimes when you give without expecting anything, the world finds a way to give it back to you in ways you'd never imagine. Weeks passed, and the diner continued to thrive in ways Michael hadn't imagined possible. Every day brought in new customers, some local, some from nearby towns, all of them drawn by the story of kindness that had spread across the internet. Michael never expected his simple act of helping a mother and son would lead to something so much bigger. But as much as the increase in business was a relief, it wasn't what kept him coming back each day. It wasn't the steady flow of cash or the full tables that mattered most. It was the feeling that had returned to the diner. The laughter, the chatter, the small moments of connection, he had missed that. One evening, as he was wiping down the counter after the last customers had left, Danny came out of the kitchen, a tired look on his face. "You know," he said, glancing around at the empty chairs, "it feels like things are really turning around here. We're busier than I've ever seen." Michael nodded, still in disbelief. "I never thought we'd get back to this." "It feels different, though, better." Danny smiled, shaking his head. "You mean it feels like it used to be? Like the old days?" Michael chuckled. "Yeah, exactly. It's been a while since I felt this way." As they finished cleaning up, Michael's mind wandered to the woman and her son. The act of kindness they had shared had created a ripple effect in his life that he couldn't explain. It was as though helping them had awakened something in him that had been dormant for a long time. Maybe it was the reminder that there was still goodness in the world, even when things felt tough. The next day, just as the lunch rush was starting, the doorbell jingled, and a familiar face walked in. It was the woman and her son again, and this time they weren't just looking for a meal. "Good to see you again." Michael greeted them with a smile. "Hi there," the woman said, her voice warm as always. "I wanted to thank you again for everything. Things have been going really well since we last saw you. We're in a much better place now." Michael felt his chest tighten with relief. "I'm so glad to hear that. It's really great to see you both doing better." The boy smiled up at him. "Mom got a promotion," he said excitedly. Michael grinned. "That's awesome, buddy." The woman looked down at her son, her eyes softening. "Yes, it's been a huge step for us. It's not just the job, though. It's everything. Things are starting to feel like we can breathe again." Michael's heart swelled with happiness. He hadn't realized just how much that moment of kindness had affected them. It was as if they were truly starting a new chapter in their lives, one where they didn't have to struggle every day to survive. They sat down, and Michael brought them their usual orders. The boy devoured his soup while his mother looked around at the diner with a content smile. "Can I ask you something?" the woman said after a few minutes, looking up from her bowl. Of course, Michael replied. I've been thinking a lot about how much you've helped us. I know it was just a small act of kindness to you, but to us it meant so much. I wanted to know if there's anything I can do to repay you. Maybe not with money, but something that could make a difference for you. Michael paused, taken aback by her offer. You don't need to repay me, he said quietly. It wasn't about that. I just did what I could to help. I know, she said softly, but I've been thinking about it, and I want to give back in some way. You've helped me and my son when we were struggling. Maybe there's something I can do to help you in return. Michael thought for a moment. He didn't want to accept anything, but he understood where she was coming from. She wanted to feel like she was contributing, like she could make a difference in his life the way he had in theirs. He smiled softly. Well, if you really want to help, he said after a long pause, you can keep sharing your story. Tell people about this place. Help others remember that kindness still exists. I think that's the best thing you can do. She looked at him thoughtfully, then nodded. I can do that. And just like that, the woman had become one of his strongest supporters. She began telling everyone she knew about the diner and how Michael had been there for her when no one else had. Days turned into weeks, and the ripple effect of that one moment of kindness continued to grow. Michael began to see more and more faces in the diner. People came in with stories to share, messages of appreciation for the way he had treated the woman and her son. Some even said they had visited because they had heard about the diner's kindness and wanted to experience it for themselves. But it wasn't just about the business anymore. Michael had realized that in a way he was paying it forward every day. Through the small interactions with customers, the conversations that lingered long after the meal was over, and the way the diner had become a place of comfort for people in need, just as it had once been for him and his father. One day, as Michael was in the middle of preparing a fresh batch of soup, Danny came into the kitchen with a look on his face that Michael couldn't quite read. Mike, Danny said, his voice serious, we need to talk. Michael wiped his hands on his apron and followed Danny to the back office, where Danny set down a stack of papers. What's going on? Michael asked, a bit concerned. Danny hesitated, then pulled out a letter. I got a call from the bank today. They've been looking at our finances and, well, we're in the clear. We don't owe anything. The bills are paid off. Michael stared at him, his heart pounding. What? How is that possible? Danny smiled, his eyes glinting with excitement. The check, the one the woman gave you, it was a pretty generous amount, and when we deposited it, it covered everything. All the bills. All the overdue payments. Michael couldn't believe it. The diner was finally in the clear. No more worrying about paying the rent, the suppliers, or the mounting debts. It was like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He laughed softly, shaking his head. I can't believe this, Danny grinned. Believe it. This place is back on track, Mike. It's all because of that kindness you showed. For a moment, Michael just stood there, processing it all. It felt unreal. Just a few months ago, he had been on the verge of closing the diner for good. But now it seemed like the diner was flourishing in ways he had never imagined. Looks like it wasn't just the customers who believed in us, Michael said quietly. Danny nodded. Looks like kindness really does come back around. As the days passed, the diner continued to grow, and so did Michael's sense of fulfillment. He found himself doing little things every day to make the place even better. The quality of the food improved. The service became friendlier. The atmosphere lightened up, and it wasn't just about the customers. Michael started to feel the joy of giving, not just taking. He spent more time talking to the people who came in, making them feel welcome, making them feel valued. He didn't need to search for meaning anymore. He had found it in the small moments, the quiet, kind exchanges, the joy in sharing something with others. And then one day, as he was serving a group of regulars at the counter, the woman and her son came in again. This time they weren't alone. They had brought their neighbors and some friends, all eager to try the food they had heard so much about. The boy waved excitedly. We brought more people to try your food. Michael smiled and waved back. I'm glad you came. You're always welcome here. As they settled in, Michael couldn't help but feel grateful. Grateful for the chance to help when it mattered most. Grateful for the way it had come full circle. As he watched the woman laugh with her friends, and her son playfully argue with a friend over who got the last slice of pie, Michael felt a sense of peace wash over him. This was what it was all about. Not just serving food, but building a community. The diner had been a place for strangers to come together, to find comfort, and to share something real. And now it was thriving again, all because of the kindness that had started with one simple meal. Michael stepped back from the counter, his heart full. He looked at the diner, the laughter, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, and realized that the real success wasn't in the profits or the busy nights. It was in the connections he had made, the lives he had touched, and the kindness that had changed everything. As the sun began to set outside, he smiled to himself. Maybe the diner was busier than ever. From early morning until late at night, people came and went. Families, students, old couples, and travelers passing through town. The story of Michael's kindness had spread far beyond Green Ridge now. Some came for the food, but most came for something else. The feeling they got when they walked through those doors. It wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It had become a place that reminded people that goodness still existed in the world. But Michael never let the attention change him. He was still the same man who came in early every morning, brewed the coffee himself, and wiped down every table before opening. The same man who treated every customer like family. One Friday evening, as the dinner rush began to slow down, Michael stood behind the counter, watching the last few customers finish their meals. The warm glow of the lights reflected off the polished tables. The sound of quiet laughter and the soft hum of conversation filled the air. He smiled to himself, proud but humble. Danny came over carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "We did good tonight," he said, handing one to Michael. "I think that's the biggest crowd we've ever had." Michael nodded, taking a sip. "Yeah, it's been a blessing. Hard to believe how far we've come." Danny chuckled. "Remember when we'd get excited if 3 people showed up at once?" Michael laughed. "I remember. I thought we'd have to close for good back then." They both grew quiet for a moment, the sound of the rain tapping lightly against the window outside. "You ever think about that night?" Danny asked. "Which one?" Michael said, though he already knew. "The night she came in. The mother and her boy." Michael smiled softly. "All the time." "I think about it every day." Danny nodded. "Funny how one small thing can change everything, huh?" Michael looked out the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. "Yeah, I didn't know it then, but helping them helped me too. Maybe even more than it helped them." He wasn't lying. The night that woman and her son had walked in, everything about his life had started to shift. It wasn't about the attention or the success that came after. It was about what it taught him. That one moment had reminded him of what really mattered: people, kindness, and heart. As the evening went on, most of the customers left, leaving only a few stragglers sipping coffee. Michael walked around the diner, refilling cups and chatting with the regulars. When the last table finally cleared, he and Danny began their usual closing routine. Just as he was about to lock the front door, he noticed someone standing outside in the rain. It was the same woman, and her son, now a little taller, holding something in his hands. Michael quickly opened the door. "Hey, what are you two doing out in this weather?" "Come in, quick." They stepped inside, shaking off the rain. The boy was grinning from ear to ear, clutching a large envelope. "Sorry for dropping by so late," the woman said, smiling. "We were in the neighborhood and wanted to stop by." "You know you're always welcome here," Michael said warmly. Sit down, sit down." They took a seat at their usual table, the one near the window. The boy placed the envelope on the table carefully. "What's this?" Michael asked. The woman smiled. "Something we wanted to give you." Michael frowned slightly, curious. He opened the envelope slowly and found a stack of papers inside, printed forms, letters, and at the very top, a note in the boy's handwriting that said, "Thank you for helping us when we needed it," the woman explained. "We've been working on something. After that night and after everything that happened with your diner, I wanted to do something that could keep your kindness going. I talked to a few local groups and businesses, and together, we started a small program. It's called Pay It Forward Meals." Michael's eyes widened. "Pay It Forward Meals?" She nodded. "Yes. It's a program where people can prepay for a meal for someone who can't afford one. They can come here, sit down, and eat without feeling embarrassed or judged. You don't have to worry about covering the cost. The community will help. We've already got people signed up to donate regularly." Michael was speechless. He stared at her, then at the papers in his hands. You did this?" "We did it together," she said, smiling at her son. "Because of you. You started it without even knowing. We just wanted to make it something bigger, something that could help others like you helped us." Michael felt his throat tighten. He took a deep breath, his voice soft when he finally spoke. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she said gently. "Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep feeding people with love." The boy leaned forward excitedly. "Mom said we can volunteer here too. I can help serve food on weekends." Michael laughed, his eyes misty. "You're hired," he said, patting the boy's shoulder. "No paycheck, though, just free soup." The boy giggled. "Deal." They all laughed, and for a few moments, the diner was filled with warmth again. The same warmth Michael had felt that rainy night months ago. Later, after they left, Michael sat at the same table, staring at the papers. He thought about how far things had come, from struggling to stay open to now becoming a place that would feed anyone who needed it. He couldn't stop smiling. The next morning, he wasted no time putting the plan into action. He printed a small sign and hung it near the entrance. It read, "Pay it forward meals. If you need a meal, it's yours. If you can give, you're helping someone else eat today." People noticed it right away. Some dropped extra cash in the jar by the counter. Others left handwritten notes of encouragement. Before long, word spread again, this time not about a viral post, but about a diner that refused to let anyone go hungry. Every day after that, someone new would come in, quietly mentioning they were there for a pay-it-forward meal. Michael never asked questions. He simply smiled and served them like any other customer. No one was treated differently. No one felt ashamed. One afternoon, a young man came in soaked from the rain, looking lost and tired. Michael recognized that look. It reminded him of the mother and her son from long ago. "Welcome," Michael said kindly. "Take a seat, friend. You look like you could use something warm." The man hesitated. I don't have any money." Michael smiled gently. "Doesn't matter. Someone already took care of your meal. You just sit down, all right?" Tears welled in the man's eyes as he nodded and sat down. Michael brought him a bowl of soup and a piece of bread, just like he had done all that time ago. As he watched the man eat quietly, he felt that same warmth in his heart again. That same peace. The circle had completed itself. What began as one simple act of kindness had grown into something far greater than he could have imagined. Months went by, and the diner became a symbol of compassion in the community. Local newspapers wrote stories about it. People donated money, food, and time. Students volunteered on weekends. Even travelers who had heard the story from afar stopped by just to eat there, not because they needed a free meal, but because they wanted to be part of something good. One evening, after closing, Michael stood outside the diner, looking up at the sign glowing in the night. The rain had just stopped and the air smelled fresh. Danny came out beside him, hands in his pockets. "You did it, Mike," Danny said softly. "You really did it," Michael smiled, shaking his head. "No, we did it. Everyone did. It was never just me," Danny nodded. "Still, you started it. You turned one small act into a chain of kindness that's helping hundreds now. That's something special." Michael looked out over the quiet street, remembering that first rainy night. The empty diner, the hungry mother, the shy boy. He could still hear the sound of the bell above the door as they walked in. He smiled. "It's funny, isn't it? I thought I was helping them that night, but they're the ones who saved me." Danny clapped him on the shoulder. "Guess life has a way of giving back to those who give." Michael nodded. "Yeah, it sure does." As they turned off the lights and locked the door, Michael glanced one last time at the sign in the window. The glow from the Pay It Forward board inside reflected softly on the glass. He whispered to himself, "Feed people with love and they'll always come back." He walked away down the quiet street, the sound of his footsteps echoing softly on the wet pavement. The diner behind him stood as a warm light in the darkness window, a reminder that kindness never fades. It always finds its way back, one heart at a time.